The maps say nothing was ever there. No ruins, no roads, no name on a single modern chart, just an empty stretch of land where, according to buried records, more than 40,000 people once lived, worked, worshipped, and vanished. Not fled, not evacuated, vanished. In the span of a few weeks, an entire city was erased from every official document that could be found. Property deeds burned, census records rewritten, photographs confiscated by men who never explained why, and the families who asked too many questions disappeared right along with their questions. You are about to hear the story governments have spent generations trying to bury. A city that thrived for centuries, sitting at the crossroads of trade routes worth unimaginable fortunes, reduced, almost overnight, to a blank space on a map. Something happened there, something so disturbing that the people in power decided it was safer to erase it than explain it. The few survivors who were ever found spoke of lights over the harbor, soldiers who arrived before anyone had called for them, and a single order given in the dead of night that no one alive today will take credit for. We still don't know exactly what happened in those final hours, but we know exactly what happened after. The world was told to forget, and for almost a century, it worked. Long before it vanished, this was a city that should not have been forgettable at all. Historians who piece together fragments call it Varenthal, a port city built where two empires' trade routes collided, its harbor crowded with merchant ships from a dozen nations. Silk, salt, timber, and rumor passed through its docks. It was wealthy beyond reason, and wealth like that attracts men who want to control it. 3 governing powers claimed influence over Varenthal at different points, and none ever fully agreed on who was truly in charge. That confusion, historians now believe, is exactly what made the city so easy to erase. No single nation felt responsible for explaining what happened to it, so none of them ever did. Picture it at its peak. Torchlit docks crowded past midnight. Foreign tongues mixing over crates of cargo. Cathedral bells competing with merchants closing deals worth fortunes. Varenthal was not some forgotten backwater. It was a place ambassadors visited, a place kings wrote letters about. What we do know is this. In its final decade, Varenthal's own records described strange disruptions, ships refusing to dock, districts sealed off by soldiers with no public explanation, local officials writing to their superiors, begging for guidance, and receiving only silence. One magistrate wrote 3 letters in a single month, each more desperate than the last, before his correspondence simply stops. Then, in a customs ledger dated months before the city disappeared from every record, one line was written and never explained. It simply read, "The harbor must not be spoken of again." No context, no follow-up, just a forbidden order, buried for over a century, until someone finally asked why. Here is where the story stops being mysterious and starts being disturbing. Cross-referencing surviving shipping manifests, military correspondence, and the private diary of a customs officer who fled Varenthal weeks before it vanished, researchers reconstructed a chilling timeline. In the final months, dock workers began falling violently ill with symptoms no physician of the era could explain. Fever, disorientation, and in the worst cases, a kind of paralysis survivors described only as the stillness. Officials did not send doctors, they sent soldiers. Entire neighborhoods were cordoned off overnight. Families were separated at checkpoints. Some never reunited. Rumors spread of entire streets left standing empty. Doors still unlocked. Meals left half-eaten on tables, as if the residents had been given no time to pack at all. And in the customs officer's diary, one entry stops the reader cold. He describes watching soldiers load unmarked crates onto ships, bound for destinations that were never logged, crates that dock workers were forbidden, under threat of execution, to inspect. Then comes the jaw-dropping detail that redefines the entire story. A shipping insurance claim, filed by a merchant house weeks after Varenthal disappeared, was denied, not because the claim was false, but because the insurer's own investigator wrote that the region in question does not, and has never, existed in any registry held by this office. An entire city, with tax records, marriage certificates, and decades of trade history, formally declared, in writing, to have never existed. This wasn't a slow fade into obscurity. This was a coordinated, deliberate erasure, carried out by multiple institutions that otherwise had no reason to cooperate with each other. Someone coordinated it. Someone paid for it. And whatever was loaded onto those unmarked ships was considered valuable enough, or dangerous enough, to justify unmaking an entire city rather than risk it being seen. To this day, no government has ever formally acknowledged that Varenthal existed at all. When independent historians finally forced the story into the open decades later, the response was not justice. It was silence, dressed up as bureaucracy. Descendants of Varenthal's refugees, families who had spent generations being told their ancestors came from an unrecorded settlement, suddenly had documentation, names, dates, proof their history had been deliberately stolen from them. Petitions were filed demanding formal acknowledgement, reparative recognition, even simple public records correction. Almost every petition was denied, delayed, or quietly buried in procedural review. One archive even claimed the requested files had been lost in transit decades earlier, despite other researchers citing those exact same files in published work years before. No official was ever charged. No institution ever apologized. The customs officer whose diary exposed the cover-up died in obscurity. His account dismissed for decades as folklore rather than testimony. His warnings ignored by the very historians who would later depend on his words to reconstruct the truth. Meanwhile, the merchant families, whose fortunes were built on those final unmarked shipments, continued to thrive. Their wealth passed down through generations who never asked where it came from, and never had to. This matters today, because the machinery that erased Varenthal still exists. Governments still classify, the corporations still shred documents, and the tools available now, digital records that can be altered instantly, entire databases that can vanish with a single command, make what happened to Varenthal easier to replicate, not harder. The line between unrecorded and erased has never been thinner than it is right now. Varenthal's descendants are still fighting for acknowledgement today, generations later, for a truth their own governments have never once been forced to confront. Their fight is the only justice this story has ever produced. Power has always understood something uncomfortable. It is easier to erase a truth than to answer for it. History is not only written by the victors, it is edited by them, redacted by them, and buried by them, one forbidden order at a time. Varenthal teaches us that silence is never neutral. Every buried record, every sealed archive, every family told their history doesn't exist, is a choice made by someone who benefited from that forgetting. Cities do not disappear on their own. People make them disappear, and then spend generations making absolutely certain no one ever asks why. The unmarked crates, the sealed harbor, the diary no one believed for 100 years, all of it survived anyway. Because the truth, it turns out, is far harder to erase than any government ever expects. So we have to ask ourselves, what else has been quietly written out of the record, and whose silence is protecting it right now? If this story unsettled you the way it unsettled us, tell us what you think really happened in that harbor, and stay close, because history is still hiding more than we've been told.